the Russians have blown up another dam that the whole world is just completely ignoring because, you know, oh, Novakovka Dam, that was last week's news. I guess we can all move on. Hello everybody, I hope you're all doing fantastic. It is Tuesday, or at the end of Tuesday here in Ukraine when I am recording this. First off, I want to apologize for the lack of streams. I really do wish I could be streaming. Obviously, I want to stay in contact with you guys as much as possible. I want to talk to you guys about the experiences I'm having down here in Ukraine. I want to talk about everything that's happening in the news. I know there's a lot happening in the news. Trump's second indictment, him having to go to the office and do the walk of shame and, fingerprint, do the whole shebang. There's a lot of ruckus around that. Sadly, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer until I have a decent internet connection. I don't know when that might be. The latest I would imagine that would be next week though. That would probably be the latest. So worst case scenario, you're gonna have to go a week without streams. I'm very sorry. I'll try to make it up by maybe doing a 6 stream week the week after. I'm very sorry. But I'm here in Kherson with Anthony Bardaway of Ukraine Without Hype, which I actually recorded an episode with them. That is their podcast. It's a fantastic podcast of 2 English speakers who are based out of Ukraine itself. So you got people on the ground with an on-the-ground perspective who have lived here for years, talking about, to an English-speaking audience largely, about Ukraine, which I appreciate because a lot of the commentary you see online is from people based in Washington, D.C., people based in Virginia or wherever in the States or in other locations, sometimes even people who have never been to Ukraine who have now shows largely focusing on Ukraine. And I'm not saying all those people are bad or anything, it's just there's a certain perspective you can only garner by living here and, breathing the Kiev air, so to speak. So I want to talk to you guys a few things. So the first thing I want to talk to you guys about was what it was like traveling to Kherson. You can consider this an update, an on-the-ground Dylan Burns update, whatever you want to call it. I know it's weird not having chat in the corner calling me names and, getting me in trouble for saying offensive things, but you just have to do that in the comment section. I'm very sorry. You can get me banned there. So traveling to Kherson, it was weird. And it's not that it was weird because, we had an extremely dangerous encounter or we had to fly on a flying saucer. It was weird because on the travel into Kherson, we were stopped at a checkpoint. It's very normal. We get stopped at checkpoints all the time. Everybody has to get stopped at checkpoints once you're traveling by car. So we came in by train, then traveled by car from Mykolaiv to Kherson, and we get stopped. And they sit us down and they talk to us about, did you communicate with the press officer, yada, yada, yada. Most of that was bog standard. But something that was different from any other experience I've had in this country was that they then asked if we had body armor and helmets. And when we confirmed that we do, they physically make sure we get out of the car, go in the back, show them the body armor and helmets, and they're checking it, like hitting it, making me hit on it, making me hit on the helmet and the body armor, making sure it's good. I never had that experience when I went to the front line in Zaporozhye. I never had that experience when I went to Donetsk and I went to Kramatorsk for the dog shelters over there. I never had that experience any time when I was in Kharkiv, even near the Russian border. They didn't even ask me about, body armor then. This is the first time I've ever had a checkpoint ask if I had body armor before going to a location. So that kind of, that left me a little concerned. That left me a little worried as we went into Kherson. But then we arrive in Kherson, and the city obviously isn't bustling, but it has more people than I initially expected. From about, noon to another time. I won't say exactly when because I don't want to give the Russians, the exact time frames when they can kill the most civilians. Because after my experience in Mykolaiv, seeing them pepper the city with artillery, I don't want to do that. There was a decent amount of people, in line for aid, trying to just maneuver around the city, go to the few stores that are open, and there are stores here that are still open. Sadly, we checked. The video game store here is not open. Gamers Rise Up. It's very disappointing. But, they're operating. But, later, 6, 7, the streets are dead. They're barren. We were going to abandoned amusement parks and locations all across the city the first day, just trying to get our bearings of the situation, and it felt like a ghost town. Sometimes it was actually difficult to find people, and the only people we would find would be checkpoint guards or people telling you, no, you can't go that way. But besides the ghost town vibes, the other thing we checked that day, which is the main reason we came here, is the flooding. And while the city center itself is quite safe, many animals and people from the surrounding area have fled to the city center because of its elevation in relation to the surrounding area, which is not as elevated, which has saved it from much of the damage that has come with the flooding. That's fantastic, but we go into the city outskirts, and much of the city outskirts that is, are still flooded. There's still houses that have the lower windows, the lower parts of it covered in water, and this is us coming here at the lower end of the flooding. When the flooding is getting not as bad, the water levels are decreasing, and they are decreasing rapidly, especially around this area. Not all areas are having the same amount of water decrease, and the elevation isn't going as low, but in our area it's decreasing very rapidly. But even with that, there are still many houses in the city of Kherson that are still drenched in water, still dealing with flooding issues, that still have their floors covered in water. Every day it does get better in the area though, as the water continues to decrease. That isn't a universal good though. I know that flooding decreasing would sound like universal good. I'll talk about that in a second when I get to day 2. I also got accustomed to the shelling here. Anytime you go to a different city or you go to a different area in Ukraine, the tempo when it comes to, the violence with the war is a little different. If you're in Kiev, it's mostly going to be sirens, and every once in a while, the odd missile strike. Recently, it's been worse because of the Russians have really picked up, but that's what it's like over there. But if you get to more frontline communities, which Kherson most certainly, even though there's a river dividing us from the Russians, it is a frontline community, is constantly getting shelled by artillery. The thud, or what we used to call him when I was still with Pavel, Philip, and the Polish aid worker gang, me, Patrick Hilsman. If any of you guys been following any of my work on my main channel, those names might ring a bell. They used to call it the thunder without the storm because, no storm clouds, no lightning, but it sounds like thunder, the constant sound of thunder in the distance. This thud, the thud of artillery, both outgoing and incoming, is constant. Every day, at least once every hour. Most of the time, you're going to have maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times in the hour, you're going to hear the sound of artillery. Sometimes it'll be a lot. You'll hear 30, maybe 35 within an hour. Sometimes you'll only hear 5. But you're going to hear it at least once an hour. A short walk into the community, just a brisk walk to your local cafe, you'll understand that this is most certainly an area where the war is still hot and civilians are very much still at risk. And the sad reality of it is that a lot of civilians have been targeted in this area, not only in the city of Kherson, but in the surrounding area, with many evacuations actually being targeted by the Russian army. I'm not the first person to document this. I think one of the better examples of this that was publicized on social media was that the what's the Jewish title again? He's the
Chief Rabbi Moshe.
Chief Rabbi,
Moshe Asman is his name.
The Chief Rabbi of Ukraine. Well, one of 2 people who claim Chief Rabbi of Ukraine. I'm not going to get into the interpolitics of the Chief Rabbi. I'm not going to call it a gang war, but whatever it is, whatever disagreement it is about who's the Chief Rabbi. One of the chief rabbis of Ukraine was involved in the evacuation efforts, and while he was filming it, he was shelled. So the cities get flooded, the villages get flooded, the areas get flooded, civilians, understandably so, get on their roofs, they climb up these buildings in order to get away from the flooding so they don't drown, and sadly we have gotten the first official deaths of this flooding. We've gotten also a lot of missing persons reports, which also include children, and I'm going to be blunt with you, most likely many of them are dead, but the ones that do survive climb onto the roofs, climb into trees, climb wherever, and then the Russians shell them. And the evacuators coming to help them. Not only on those trying to be saved on the left bank, because there was an evacuation effort of people in Russian-occupied territory to safer territory, and they were shelled, and civilians were killed. I think 23 were injured, 3 were killed in those strikes, but they're also just striking people on the Ukrainian controlled side of the river, just engaging in everyday evacuation efforts. I know it's weird to say everyday evacuation efforts, but evacuation efforts on this side. So evacuation efforts are getting shelled. There's nowhere in this area that I would call safe or off limits to the Russian bombardment, very sadly. But that is the reality of the situation.
Blue catch from the tree. It's the one that he wants to rescue, I think. I'm very sure it's exactly that position.
That has been my experience here. There has not been a cessation in the fighting because of this man-made disaster. And I want to emphasize that it is a man-made disaster. This isn't a natural disaster. Most areas, most people that I know who have experienced flooding, they have never experienced flooding from a man-made disaster. This is man-made completely. Let's see, what else do we have? I got some bullet points here, just trying to go through it all. I'm very tired. It's been a long day. So that was day one. One last thing on day one and the shelling. I've gotten used to it, kinda. I've noticed this for my second time here, that I've kind of gotten used to the sound of it in the distance. I don't react to it much anymore. I kind of just acknowledge it as part of the background noise, like a bird chirping maybe. It hasn't gotten to the point where I literally can't tell it's happening. I always, to some degree, acknowledge that it's there, but if you don't get some degree, adjusted to those sounds, you're gonna go crazy. You're gonna go insane. If every single time you hear anything, you're just like, you're gonna go crazy. It would be terrible for your psychological health. Humans, we're like cockroaches. We adapt to our surroundings. We do whatever is necessary to, keep on thriving. And that's what I'm doing as well. I'm getting used to it, but I'm not completely used to it. Today, actually, we were doing some cleanup, and during this cleanup process, we were doing with other aid workers, which I'm gonna get into in a moment. They were trying to break what I thought was like plastic tiles of some sort. I don't know exactly what they were, but they were plastic tiles. And every time one of the people would break this plastic tile during this cleanup process in this abandoned building, it would make a very loud pop, and everyone in the room would jolt. And I think it was only the fifth or sixth or seventh tile that was broken that I stopped jolting in reaction to it. And it wasn't like pop, I acknowledge it, and then I react to it. It was just a physical reaction that I couldn't control. And I noticed that I wasn't the only person who had that as well. And this isn't something I've only experienced here. This is also something I've experienced when I got back to the States. That's something I'm gonna have to deal with on my own. But speaking of those tiles being broke up, I wanna talk about the second day and what we did today. So the day started with us meeting some lovely German fellows. One of them, in fact, is a triathlon athlete who in like 9 days, according to him, 9 or 10 days, is going to be going back to Germany to do a triathlon of some sort, to do some sort of like physical, competition sport thing. I'm not a big sports guy. I liked boxing in high school. That's really it. Combat sports, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu. I only did boxing, but I had interest in those. So I don't know exactly all the ins and outs of it. But I couldn't imagine doing the type of stressful evacuation work which these German fellows were doing. And then after all these days living with the shelling and the evacuations and the stress and the lack of feeling of personal safety, going back home and running a triathlon. Definitely when you're not eating as well, you're not drinking as much water as you should, and I gotta say, I'm probably not eating as much as I should. I need to be better about water intake, but you get very distracted easily in this area. So I meet these German fellows, and they are in Bucha and other areas, and even had military escorts due to how dangerous it was to kick down the doors of people's homes around Bucha, looking when they had a list from those homeowners of what animals were in their homes, trying to find out if those animals were living, if they were killed by fighting, if they fled, if they starved to death, if the home collapsed on them, and he was kicking in doors doing that. And he's still doing it today. After he goes home, he feels the cry in his soul to come back and help animals, and he's back and he's doing it again. So these are really, really good people doing it for the love of helping people. They're crazy, of course, because anybody who does this type of work is crazy to some extent, but they're just crazy enough to be willing to do this type of work. So they agree to allow us to film them doing their work, whether it be evacuations or anything else. And shortly after that, about an hour later, they get contacted by another group asking them to help them make an animal shelter, which means cleaning out an old abandoned building and filling it with cages for dogs and food and medical equipment for the animals. Not medical equipment, but like medicine for the animals. I wish they had medical equipment. But, you know, the dog shelters and cat shelters and animal shelters out here are not that, they're not exactly flowing in NGO cash as many Western armchair commentators would have you believe Ukraine is flowing in it. Sadly, for when it comes to the animals and most of the country, to be honest, that is not the case. But we spent the whole day basically cleaning out this animal shelter, and I did what I could to lend a hand here or there, but again, I'm there as a journalist, so I was trying to balance both recording and my personal want to contribute as much as possible. But we did a good job, I think. We cleaned out the whole building, and we got a bunch of cats moved in, including some kittens that were still thankfully attached to the mother. Well, one of them was, some of the kittens still had their mom. Some of them also didn't have their mom now, whether died or abandoned, I don't know, I didn't ask. But a lot of cats are now in a safer location, getting some amount of treatment, some amount of care that they could not get on the streets, as many of these cats have not only been hurt by the war and abandoned by their former owners, as many have had to flee the country, but are also traumatized by the war. I was talking about this subject with one of the evacuation workers, and they were telling me that they had accepted 2 huskies from Ukraine into their home, and when they hear loud noises, they freak out. And I know dogs usually freak out to loud noises, but I mean whimpering, hiding under tables, hiding under beds, just like crawling into, like not crawling, but like scrunching into a tiny little fur ball on the floor. Animals can be traumatized by war too. That's not a topic that's explored as much because, an animal isn't going to come up to you and say, "Hello, Dylan, I have PTSD. I need immediate treatment. I need to start popping some pills. I'm drowning my sorrows in whiskey." Cats can't do that. Dogs that can't do that. It's not as visible to us, except out in those little moments where we can kind of see it, And that is also a reality that many of these animals face, is they can get traumatized by war, just like human beings can get traumatized by war. Besides that, I don't have much more to report from this area, besides the fact that I want to continue to film here. I also want to help any more if I see any opportunity to help while I'm down here. There's a lot of people that are in need in this area, and let me just finish off by saying that this was a man-made disaster. Every death from this flooding was completely avoidable. Every injury from this flooding, one of the people we interviewed today and we photographed today was injured in the process of trying to save animals. Everything that was destroyed by this was completely and utterly avoidable. And we have New York Times reports coming out talking about the munitions experts and explosive experts, demolition experts have analyzed the destruction of the Novokakhovka Dam, and they say it must have come from something internally. Most of the evidence seems to be pointing towards the Russian doing it. Now, I am not going to be one of those armchair commentators saying, I know 100% for sure that X group did it or that group did it. But the vast majority of the evidence is pointing that way. And since then, the Russians have blown up another dam that the whole world is just completely ignoring because, Novokakhovka Dam, that was last week's news. I guess we can all move on. But they did it again. Obviously, it's not having the same humanitarian catastrophe, but this shows that they're very willing to do it. Again, this is a man-made catastrophe, completely avoidable. It just goes to shows that if the Russians can't have Ukraine, which they view as a colonial project, then nobody can. Then they'll destroy it. They'll try to create it into some rump state, economically destroyed, environmentally destroyed, and demographically destroyed, so it can not be an example to the other post-Soviet states that are still within, either Russia's grasp or working within the Russian economic or alliance system, that there is an alternative, to the oligarchical authoritarian system that Vladimir Putin and those around him promotes. It's an absolute tragedy down here. I wish nothing for the best for everybody who is involved in evacuation efforts, everybody involved in rescue efforts. It is unbelievably sad. The only thing I will say for everybody out there is that if there is anyone you want to contribute to, some people that I've seen on the ground here is the Solidarity Collective. I saw some of their people out here, some anarchists out here who are doing good work. There's one group I would direct you guys towards if you wanted to do any fundraising around this area. There are other groups as well. I'm sure you guys could research them yourselves. And of course, I have my own personal biases because I interact with these people on the ground. Besides that, if you guys want to follow my updates a little bit more constantly, I'm on Twitter, DylanBurns1776. That's my @ You can also follow me on Instagram for photos that I take here on the ground, DylanBurnsTV on Instagram. And if you want to support me and make it easier for me to do this type of work, and so I feel a little less, financially, volatile, you can always go to my website, DylanBurns.tv, and donate and sub. The reason why I direct people there is that those donation profits and sub profits all of it goes to me and the editors behind this operation. Danabo, who's going to be editing this anyway, he gets a cut of that too, and it makes it so I can do this type of content. Where if you sub on Twitch, Jeff Bezos gets half of it. And as much as we all love Jeff Bezos because he's my employer and I have to say that, I would like all of the money, please. Of course, editors get a pay too. Sadly, I cannot replace them with AI robots. Beep, boop, beep. That's very sad. The other place you can support me, of course, is on Patreon, DylanBurnsTV on Patreon. Everybody stay safe. If any of you guys are in Ukraine, please listen to the air alerts because of the Zaporozhye counteroffensive and just how barbaric the Russian bombardment has been recently. I just saw the news updates from Kiev and Ri with the 11 people who were killed by Russian bombardments there, people hiding in their homes under their beds as the Russians bomb the city with rockets. Please listen to air alerts. Please stay away from windows when you hear the sirens, and please stay safe. Keep your family close. Love you guys. Sorry that this is what we have to do since I have such a poor connection out here, but when you're this close to the front line, good internet connections are not always guaranteed. See you guys next time.